All right, everyone, welcome back for part two of the establishment of harmony, and we're going to discuss the first Viennese school. Before we kick off our listening examples and talking about Franz Joseph Haydn and one of his famous symphonies, we're going to talk a little bit more globally about tonal harmony and how it works. We're going to take a fairly primitive example that hopefully you know, that hit tune, Row, Row, Row Your Boat, and talk about why it's a melody that helps establish a key. I'm going to go ahead and toggle back over to my lecture notes because I have Row, Row, Row Your Boat written out in terms of notation or sheet music. So give me one moment. Okay, here we go. So like I said, in works of functional harmony, it means that we're going to be using chords that have a particular kind of role or function in terms of the tension and release of a piece of music. And so when I'm talking about tension and release, I'm talking about tension being atonality or dissonance, a temporary like moment where there's some sort of crunchiness that eventually it needs to work itself into a release or a resolution or a consonance. So when a piece is functional or tonal, it generally means that we're going to start on an important chord and end on an important chord. And in the middle section, we're going to feel like we've moved away from it in some sort of sense. So in order to kind of have that kind of journey, we're generally moving to generally the dominant. We move from the tonic to the dominant in a melody, back to the tonic again. And we saw that kind of motion a number of times in the sonata allegro form examples that we discussed. So in the case of Row, Row, Row Your Boat, here's our sheet music. I've written out the lyrics. Where it happened to be in a compound time signature, 6/8, very specifically a simple compound time where we're dealing with two big pulses of 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So and below we have the chord, or rather the scale degrees, which generally help outline chords that are important in this piece. So if our Row, Row, Row Your Boat example is in C major, we're going to have a lot of melodic motion that helps outline the importance of C major. So check this out. Like row, row, row your boat, row, boat. That's 1 to 3, gently down the stream. That's to 5. Merrily, 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 merrily. That descends from 1, 5, 3, 1. Life is but a dream. Going back down to 1 again. So we have lots of important reiterations of 1 and 5 at important moments. The melody starts on scale degree 1, it ends on scale degree 1. The middle, our height of our melody, merrily, 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 starts on scale degree 1 at the octave from C to C. It's the high point of our melody, and ultimately it resolves to again the tonic, scale degree 1. We have many different moments where we outline the importance of a C major chord horizontally, while it's also being reinforced vertically. So we've talked a lot about this idea of forms that are reinforced on the macro scale and the micro scale. So Row, Row, Row Your Boat is a great example that has this sort of smaller and larger motion that is built into the piece. Probably one of the reasons why it's withstood the test of time. It's very easy to remember because it has this very predictable accordion kind of quality of tension and release to it. And the first Viennese school composers were really gifted in creating melodies that that played around with that idea of tension and release. So each of our each of the three composers that we're going to take a listen to definitely played around with the idea of functional harmony. I would say Franz Joseph Haydn was the most uh, rule abiding composer of the three. Mozart is a little bit more ambitious when it comes to his sense of adventurous harmonies, and Beethoven even more so. Again, he was a bridge composer that effectively bridged the gap between the classical and romantic era. So he has a lot of qualities in common with Mozart, but kind of pushes the boundaries a little bit more harmonically. Very specifically in his last compositions, the string quartets, which we listened to as a part of our string quartet lecture, if memory serves. So before we go on, I have a little piano tutorial up that shows the key sequence of Row, Row, Row Your Boat, so you don't have to just only suffer through me singing it. Let me go ahead and pull this up for your listening pleasure so you can see the melodic sequence, which spans the interval of an octave. Here we go. Great. So, like I said, the melody spans an octave. The only note that's reiterated is the note C. It helps reinforce our feeling of that being the tonic. The next most important note that we hear is the outlier of that intervallic distance of a fifth from C to G, the tonic to dominant. Which is also structurally important, but helps reinforce the idea that C is our starting point. We're going to hear a lot of music that ends up sort of establishing the relationship between 1 and 5. So the first composer that we're going to listen to is Franz Joseph Haydn. We're going to listen to one of his symphonies. If you happen, if YouTube, which it is somewhat likely to take out this listening example, please go to the playlist. It's included in the description in this video to listen to our listening example. Because while we're talking about this in the abstract, we're still going to want to actually hear what functional harmony sounds like in the context of the classical era. So, like I said, the composer that we're going to visit first is Franz Joseph Haydn. Very specifically, we're going to, hold on, I've got it up here. We're going to listen to the fourth movement, the finale of his one of his symphonies, Symphony Number 45. It happens to very clearly use functional harmony, and we're going to notice that it is generally pleasant to listen to, that we're generally listening to certainly chords that are at rest with the occasional dissonance. Other things that we're going to still want to pay attention to: what's happening in the texture, what's happening in the rhythm or meter of the piece, what instrumentation is this for? In fact, you already know what instrumentation this is for because I said it was the fourth movement of a symphony. In fact, that also tells you about the form, but as the fourth movement of a symphony is always written for the orchestra. And as this is a classical orchestra, we know that it's going to be an instrumental body that's composed mostly of string instruments with a couple of woodwind instruments and even fewer brass instruments. So it's a kind of conservative sound. Texturally, we also know that the classical era tends to err on the side of homophonic texture. So hopefully we'll hear that that is indeed true. form and structure. This is the fourth movement of a symphony. So our macro structure is that it is a 4-movement symphony. The finale, we're going to try to figure out if it has 1 or 2 thematic ideas, but we generally hear 1 or 2 thematic ideas within a piece. Remember, the first movement is that the real special showcase movement where we definitely have 2, or in the case of Schubert, 3 thematic ideas. Anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and listen to a good chunk of this fourth movement finale. See if we can't hear that it is indeed functional, that we are listening to this sort of pull back to home, or that we're listening to a lot of the return of a particular note. All right, let's go ahead and listen. So we have a 1, 2, 3, 4. So simple meter. Okay, I'm just going to pause it real quick to sort of review some of the things that we're listening to. Certainly, this is metrically regular, which is something that a lot of the classical era composers were a big fan of using, rhythmic regularity or metric regularity. There's not a lot of rubato here at all. It's very like 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember that when you're sort of dividing or multiplying things by 2, we're ending up with a simple meter. So this is certainly a simple meter finale. The orchestra, hopefully you heard that it is mostly about the string family. There's a little bit of presence of woodwind and brass instruments, but the onus of who's playing melody is mostly dependent on the string family, and that historically helps us place it also in the classical era. Melody, what we've heard so far is that beginning section, it uses a majority of major chords. We had a little bit of contrast that are happening in minor, but for the most part, everything is very pleasant to listen to. There's not too much tension that requires a sense of resolution. Whatever sort of tension that we have is quickly resolved harmonically and sounds very pleasing to the ear. That sort of chocolate chip cookie analogy that I was explaining earlier. In terms of texture, lots of homophonic texture. However, Haydn is on the beginning part of the classical era, also belonging to the late part of the sort of Baroque tradition. There are plenty of pockets here of polyphony. Hopefully you heard the beginning has a little bit of homophonic texture, but then also a little bit of call and response that works into a little bit of polyphony, back to homophonic texture. So this one's a little bit more adventurous in terms of how many textures it's going through. Let's listen to just a little bit more to sort of reiterate those same ideas that I was explaining. Did you notice that we are now listening to something totally different than our beginning feel? We actually are in a different meter as well. We're in a compound time at this juncture. One, two, three, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Good. Let me explain what's happening here. So we're listening to Haydn's 45th Symphony, which is actually nicknamed his Farewell Symphony. And the reason why it's called the Farewell Symphony is, as you've noticed, there are musicians that are leaving the stage. Why are they leaving the stage? Well, there's a interesting story here in that musicians of the court that Haydn was the court composer of were asking for some time off, and their request was not granted, despite the fact that the musicians played for long hours and didn't ask for time off. They had been asked to stay at the estate past their contract by some considerable amount of time, and it was no longer okay with any of them. They hadn't, for example, seen any increase in pay, and at that point, obviously the pace of life was slightly different, but a few months was kind of a big deal. And so Haydn, in a point of protest, wrote the Farewell Symphony, where in the finale, the final movement, during the B section, we're in the second thematic idea, which is indeed in 3/4, or compound time rather, a very slow one, which is contrasting from our fast simple time idea, where musicians leave the stage one by one. It was an interesting point of artistic protest, and one that Haydn was brave enough to put in a piece of music. So we're going to see this continue as one by one the musicians disappear off stage, making a statement to the audience, which was fairly radical at that time. Let's go ahead and play the rest of it. Um, so and I always like playing this piece and not really telling anyone what it's about initially, but um, uh, artists making political statements is nothing new. I love what Haydn did in terms of this piece of music and the kind of statement of you get what you pay for. So if you don't pay us for more time, I'm just going to write people out of this last movement one by one, and it's going to be real awkward. And definitely Haydn, not quite necessarily as funny as Mozart might have been, at least from Mozart's personal writings and what they reveal. Still made kind of a little bit of a statement to everyone, which was rather effective, but also somewhat comical. In any case, that concludes our part 2. We're going to come back for part 3. We're going to listen to Mozart, a little bit of dramatization of Mozart's life, a small clip of the film Amadeus. Then we'll listen to one of his larger excursions. That's kind of painted by this dramatic scene that we're going to listen to. We're going to revisit. We've talked about Mozart already. We're going to continue revisiting him throughout the semester, and then in our final part, we'll talk about Beethoven, everyone's favorite, who again we've also discussed this semester as well. In any case, I will see you guys back for part 3.